There is a plant growing in the cracks of sidewalks across America right now that produces more complete protein per acre than corn, survives drought conditions that destroy wheat fields, and fed the most powerful civilization in the Western Hemisphere for 8,000 years. You have walked past it. You have probably pulled it from your garden and thrown it away. And the same forces that once executed people for growing it have spent 500 years making sure you would never learn its name. This is not a theory. This is documented in the Codex Mendoza, a colonial archive commissioned by the Spanish Empire to record what it had just destroyed. It is documented in the journals of Hernán Cortés. It is documented in the regulatory records of the United States Department of Agriculture. A crop so productive it sustained an empire of millions was systematically outlawed, reclassified as a noxious weed, and buried, not because it was dangerous, but because you cannot build $100 billion in annual government subsidies around something that grows wild in a vacant lot. In this investigation, we are going to expose who outlawed the most nutritious grain crop in the Americas, what the National Academy of Sciences formally documented in 1984 that nobody in Washington acted on, and how you can grow more usable protein in 400 square feet of backyard than an industrial feedlot produces per acre. Welcome to Channel Name. The archive opens in central Mexico, 6,000 years before the first European ever set foot on this continent. Long before the Aztec Empire was an empire, before the pyramids at Teotihuacan, before the calendar stones, and before the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan rose from the lake, farmers in the Tehuacan Valley of central Mexico were cultivating a plant they called huautli. The year was approximately 4000 BCE. These were not sophisticated irrigated systems. The land was semi-arid. The rainfall was unreliable. And yet, generation after generation, these farmers grew enough food to support growing communities in one of the driest agricultural environments in the Americas. The reason was huautli. We call it amaranth. By the height of the Aztec Empire in the 1400s, amaranth had become one of 4 foundational pillars of the most productive agricultural system in the Western Hemisphere, alongside corn, beans, and chia. We do not need to speculate about this. The Codex Mendoza, compiled in 1541 under Spanish colonial order to document the empire that had just been conquered, records that the Aztec tribute system collected more than 200,000 bushels of amaranth grain annually from conquered cities, not as a secondary crop, as a primary form of wealth, paid alongside jade and gold. Why? Because amaranth does something no other grain crop does with the same efficiency. It uses a photosynthesis pathway called C4, the same pathway that makes corn grow fast, but amaranth achieves it with a fraction of the water. In the semi-arid highlands where the Aztec Empire expanded for 5 centuries, this was not an agricultural curiosity. It was the biological engine of civilization. The knowledge spread. Indigenous cultures from present-day Peru to present-day New Mexico cultivated amaranth and integrated it into their food systems. In Asia, leaf amaranth had been cultivated in India, China, and Southeast Asia for centuries. Independently, on opposite sides of the planet, human civilizations had converged on the same plant. If a crop sustains multiple independent civilizations for 8,000 years, it is not a weed. It is a threat to anyone who needs to control the food supply. And in 1521, someone decided to control it. In August of 1521, Hernán Cortés completed the siege of Tenochtitlan. The Aztec Empire collapsed, and within years of that conquest, for the first time in 8,000 years of cultivation, growing amaranth became a punishable offense. The Spanish justification was religious. Aztec priests had used amaranth seeds, bound with honey, and in some ceremonies with the blood of offerings, to form ritual effigies of Aztec gods. The Dominican friar Diego Duran, writing in his Historia de las Indias de Nueva España around 1579, documented these ceremonies in detail. The Spanish missionaries who followed the soldiers needed the old religious system destroyed to its material foundations. A crop embedded in ceremony is not just food, it is spiritual infrastructure. So the missionaries and colonial administrators targeted it. Growing huautli under Spanish colonial law became a punishable offense. Historical accounts document that farmers caught cultivating it faced severe penalties, and the colonial administration had a simple logic: a population that can feed itself from its own fields is a population that cannot be controlled through food. Within a century of the conquest, amaranth cultivation had collapsed from a continent-wide staple into marginal wild growth at the edges of colonial agricultural land. The Codex Mendoza, the very document that recorded 200,000 bushels of annual tribute, was compiled by administrators who simultaneously oversaw the destruction of the crop it described. 500 years later, the work continued. The Federal Noxious Weed Act, amended significantly through the 1990 Farm Bill and applied with expanded force from 1991 onward, created legal classifications that restricted cultivation of multiple amaranthus species across the United States. The legal line between edible grain varieties and invasive weed species was drawn in ways that discouraged farmers, researchers, and extension offices from engaging with amaranth at all. Corn received $116 billion in federal subsidies between 1995 and 2021. Wheat received $47 billion. Amaranth received $0. This is not neglect. This is a design choice, and it has a 500-year paper trail. In 1984, the National Academy of Sciences published a formal report titled Amaranth: Modern Prospects for an Ancient Crop. It was peer-reviewed. It was cited by researchers in more than 30 countries. It concluded that amaranth possessed exceptional protein quality and warranted urgent attention as a crop for drought-prone and food-insecure regions of the world. That report has been sitting in the public domain for 40 years. Let me tell you what the National Academy of Sciences was reacting to. Grain amaranth contains 13 to 14% protein by weight. Corn contains 9%. White rice contains 7%. Wheat contains 12%. But the percentage alone does not tell the complete story. Most grains are deficient in lysine, an essential amino acid the human body cannot produce on its own. Lysine deficiency is one of the most widespread nutritional gaps in grain-dependent populations worldwide. Amaranth contains lysine at levels comparable to animal protein. This makes amaranth's protein profile not just higher, but qualitatively more complete than any commodity grain currently receiving federal subsidies. Researchers measuring the standard protein quality score, the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, found amaranth rated comparably to beef. Now consider the water. Producing a full corn grain harvest requires approximately 25 to 30 inches of rainfall equivalent over the growing season. Amaranth, using its C4 photosynthesis pathway, has been documented producing viable grain harvests on 12 to 15 inches or less. Under drought conditions that cause complete corn crop failure, amaranth continues producing. This is not a marginal difference. Consider what it does for livestock. Amaranth leaves contain up to 33% crude protein by dry weight. Alfalfa, the gold standard of American livestock forage, contains 15 to 22%. Studies published in animal science journals have confirmed that amaranth can replace 25 to 50% of soybean meal in poultry diets with no measurable loss in performance. Protein density matters. NASA studied amaranth in the 1980s as a candidate crop for space missions, selected specifically because its protein density, growth rate, and water efficiency outperformed conventional grain crops on every efficiency metric that mattered for closed-loop food production. It simply outperformed. A backyard garden of 400 square feet of grain, amaranth can produce 75 to 150 pounds of grain in a single season from one packet of seeds. So here's the question that should make you furious. If the National Academy of Sciences formally identified this crop as a solution to world food insecurity in 1984, if NASA verified its nutritional superiority, if the data on drought tolerance and protein quality and livestock value is this clear, Why has the federal government spent 40 years subsidizing corn with $116 billion while amaranth received nothing? Because you cannot build a commodity empire around a plant that grows wild in your vacant lot. You cannot monopolize something that saves its own seeds. In the summer of 2012, the United States experienced the worst drought in more than half a century. Across Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Nebraska, cornfields turned brown in July and failed. The USDA declared agricultural disaster in more than 1,000 counties across 26 states. Federal crop insurance payouts reached $17 billion. Food prices rose across the country. In the field edges, in the fence rows, in the margins of those same failed cornfields, amaranth kept growing. The plant, classified as a noxious weed, watched the subsidized crop die beside it and did not stop. Nobody held a press conference about it. But go further back, to the decades immediately following the Spanish conquest, to the communities who watched their food system dismantled in a generation. The nutritional collapse that followed the suppression of amaranth is documented by historians who study this period. The colonial food system that replaced the four-crop Aztec agricultural model was less protein complete, less drought resilient, and less productive per acre than what it replaced. The people who had refined that agricultural system over 8,000 years were reduced to nutritional dependence on a food system designed to serve their colonizers. This is what the suppression of agricultural knowledge costs. Not in theory, in bodies. In generations eating nutritionally incomplete grain because the crop that completed it was outlawed by men who arrived with guns and a mandate to erase what they found. Today, 42 million Americans face food insecurity. The most nutritionally complete grain crop on this continent is growing as a despised weed in the vacant lots of the same neighborhoods where families cannot afford adequate protein. The plant survived. The knowledge nearly did not. But it is still here. Amaranth never needed their permission. It is still growing. And so can you. The grain varieties available for cultivation, Amaranthus cruentus, Amaranthus hypochondriacus, and Amaranthus caudatus, are legally sold as seed in most U.S. states. Before purchasing, check your state's noxious weed list. The restrictions in most states apply to invasive weedy species, Palmer amaranth and water hemp, not to cultivated grain varieties. The distinction matters and is usually clear in state agricultural department documentation. Direct seed into your soil after the last frost once soil temperature reaches at least 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Sow seeds thinly at a 1/4 inch depth. For grain production, thin plants to 12 to 18 inches apart when they reach 3 inches tall. For leaf harvest, grow plants as densely as 6 inches apart and harvest outer leaves continuously through the season. Direct planting at the right time is important for success. Full sun is preferred. Water once or twice weekly until plants reach 12 inches. After that point, the plant becomes largely self-managing. Full sun and minimal care give the best results. Days from seed to harvestable grain are 90 to 120 days. A single mature plant in good conditions will yield 2 to 3 pounds of grain. A modest 20 by 20 foot garden, 400 square feet, can produce 75 to 150 pounds of grain in a single season. That potential yield is remarkable. Harvest. When seeds begin falling easily from the seed head, cut the heads, hang them in a dry location for 2 weeks, then thresh by rubbing over a bucket and winnow to remove the chaff. The grain stores for years in a cool, dry container. Harvest at the right time and store properly. Save seeds every season. You will never buy amaranth seed again. The total cost is a single seed packet that costs $5 to $10. Plant it in spring. Harvest grain in fall. Save seeds. Repeat forever. This is a closed loop that no supply chain disruption can break and no commodity price spike can reach. So why isn't this in every garden? Because the agricultural industrial system that replaced it, the corn and wheat and soy complex, worth hundreds of billions annually, is built on your dependence. Amaranth offers protein they cannot patent. drought resistance they cannot subsidize away, and seed sovereignty they cannot revoke. That is abundance. And abundance is the enemy of every system built on scarcity. They called it a weed. They regulated it into obscurity. They made sure you never learned its name in school, but you know it now. The plant that fed the Aztec Empire is growing in your neighborhood. It costs $5 to grow 150 pounds of it. It produces more complete protein than anything on your grocery store shelf. You are now one of the people who knows what the weed in the crack of your sidewalk actually is. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to our channel and share this with someone who is still poisoning the most nutritious grain on their block. Every share preserves what they tried to erase. The next vault opens soon. The amaranth is already growing. It was always waiting.